Hi everyone. I hope that you're doing well. And in this video, I am going to go over the outcomes for our third batch of assignments in EH200. As I get into these comments, you'll start to notice some trends in terms of what I'm saying. Some of you will notice that what I'm saying is somewhat repetitious from previous assignments and previous videos. That's okay. All right. Sometimes we need to take a little bit more time to become aware of some of the fundamental values that we have for communicating in a course. So you'll hear a little bit of that as I get into the comments in this video. All right. So without further commentary, let's first talk about step 10, which was a quiz. And that was, again, a quiz that was asking us to make some connections between some fundamental concepts and phrasing from Kelly's introduction and a story that we're reading in this class. The average was a 92, which is, again, a very high average, okay, for a quiz. And it's high enough that I don't necessarily think I need to revisit any specific part of the quiz. There was no question that seemed to, again, generate a great deal of confusion from anybody. And again, as I like to say with these quizzes, I put a number of them in the class, and anybody could have a moment or two where they get a couple wrong on a quiz, for whatever reason, a couple answers wrong on a quiz. So it's not the end of the world if the quiz came in with a lower grade than you had hoped or expected. It is hopefully some motivation to enter into the next quiz with more preparation, perhaps more familiarity. And to that, I would stress the idea that when I ask you questions, I'm generally going to be asking questions that draw language from Kelly's introduction, or that point you towards specific things in the reading most of the time. Okay, there'll be some questions that ask you to go above and beyond that, but most of the time what I'm asking you to do is to show that you are familiar with the text. So why do I say that? If you are stumped by a question, generally the question can be answered by revisiting the relevant material. So the relevant section of Kelly's introduction, or the relevant sections of Kelly's introduction, and the text that you're working with. Okay, so again, we came out with a 92 as a class average. Is very good, and so not much else to say there. If you have questions about step 10, let me know. Step 11 was our effort to revise our previous revision. That is, we first wrote about our experiences with short stories in step 2. We revised that in step 6 to talk about how our experiences with short stories could be related to Cathedral, a story we had just all read as a class. And when we got to step 11, we were now modifying once again to talk about with specific terms how it is Cathedral and A Good Man is Hard to Find can be related to each other. Now, along the way in these videos, I've been stressing this idea of citing the documents you're engaged with. Okay, so when it comes to step 11, the average for the class was a 90, which is a very solid, B range grade. So not a lot of red flags there with the grade, but we can talk about why grades are maybe lower than they otherwise could have been or should have been. One of the things that I didn't see in some submissions was much engagement with Flannery O'Connor's A Good Man is Hard to Find. Okay, so there were a number of submissions that had no cited references to O'Connor's story. Now, one of the basic ideas we're trying to get across in this class is the idea that when you're working with a course document, okay, when you're making claims, observations about any subject, really, in an academic environment, you need to be able to reference what it is you are working with, what it is you are talking about. So there's a ever-present need to bring evidence into your writing. Now, that doesn't mean that every sentence needs to be cited. That's not what it means. But when we make a point, we associate that point with some cited evidence, and then we go on to explain how that cited evidence supports our point. There's other relevant ideas here too, like the evidence that we cite needs to be significant. It can't just be any old thing we want to cite. But fundamentally right now, what I'm trying to make everybody aware of is this need to be citing the documents we're working with. So in terms of step 11, there were some issues that could be described this way. Some submissions were drawing from Kelly but weren't citing Kelly. Some documents were drawing from Carver but were not citing Carver. Some documents were drawing from O'Connor but were not citing O'Connor. Okay, and so we want to be aware of the need to do that. That was kind of one level, one kind of issue. Another issue that came up was submissions that were only loosely engaged, very loosely engaged with the documents, at least at the level of citation. So you might remember the assignment is asking you to address the story in some specific ways, drawing from specific terms that Kelly uses. That should require multiple pieces of evidence in order to justify an explanation on your part of whatever it is you want to say about these stories and how they might be related to each other. So there were a lot of submissions that had like one reference to Carver and no reference to O'Connor, or maybe one reference to Carver and one reference to O'Connor. That was good. That was better. Okay. But what I want you to get from the assignment overall is an awareness of the need to be using cited references to back up the things you want to make, or to introduce the terms or concepts that you'll be using as part of your analysis. So again, a 90 is a good average. And there's a lot of room for growth in the class. We just want to be aware of that. Something else that started to creep into assignment 11 was there were a number of submissions that presented underdeveloped or grossly overdeveloped paragraphs. Okay, so when we're thinking about a paragraph, again, in this class, we're thinking about something that's about 6 to 8 sentences long. And there were some submissions that kind of presented these oftentimes very short, kind of superficial, which I don't mean in an insulting way, I mean in the sense they didn't get into much specific detail, conclusions that were kind of throwaways. Sometimes I think people were trying to hit a word count limit, which is not a good reason to structure a paragraph that way. We need to understand that when we start a paragraph, we're responsible for that paragraph. We're responsible for making sure that the paragraph presents and develops a single idea, and we're responsible as much as we can be for ensuring that that paragraph is understandable. That is, someone else can look at it and get a sense of what it is you are talking about. Underdeveloped paragraphs don't do that. Underdeveloped paragraphs aren't in the service of your reader. They are in the service of you. And so when we're drafting, it's fine if you have an underdeveloped paragraph, but as you're editing your work or proofreading your work and getting ready to submit your work, you want to look at those little paragraphs. First, you want to ask yourself, is this paragraph necessary? Like, am I really saying anything here? And in an academic context, you usually know you're saying something if you're making a point about something in a document. So that's kind of your first tell. So is this paragraph doing anything? There were a number of opening paragraphs as well that were rather superficial. That is a paragraph that would include no cited information. Again, I don't mean superficial in a negative sense, in a sarcastic sense. I mean the word in a more kind of literal sense. So look for those opportunities to be more specific in your language and your phrasing, and to be more meaningful in the comments that you make and the points it is you're trying to express. Now, the other end of that spectrum is writing that comes in with these giant block paragraphs, okay, that kind of tackle generally a subject, but don't really develop something specific. Or they may develop something specific, but they also contain so much extraneous phrasing, often related to divergent ideas, that the reader can't really follow you all the way through it. Again, that kind of writing is writing in service of you, not in service of your reader. And as we become better writers in college, one of the things you want to be aware of is that it's really never all about us. It's always about them. It's always about your reader. So how can I structure this so that someone else who doesn't know me necessarily, doesn't know how I think, doesn't know how I communicate, how is it that that person can make sense of what I'm writing? So there were some opportunities at the beginning of the submissions and at the end of the submissions to develop those paragraphs. And again, we want to be really avoidant of these giant block paragraphs, which suggest a couple things. They show you struggling. I don't mean that in a negative way either. They show you like literally working with the material, but they also show you kind of not recognizing that you're writing in an academic context and you're trying to communicate with somebody else. Okay. So that can be a hard lesson to learn. And it's not that a longer paragraph can't present a detailed idea, but really what we're aiming for here is for you simply to express ideas and connect them, okay, in multiple paragraphs. So keep those comments in mind as you draft and revise your work. All right, so step 12 was a quiz with a perfect score of 100. So congratulations. I have very little to add to that. You did a good job. Step 13 has some issues that are very similar to step 11, but there's a few differences I'll talk about. So the average for step 13, again, was very good. It was a 92. High B, right up on the edge of an A- for the class is really good. Okay, it's really, really good. There were some underdeveloped paragraphs in the submissions, okay, and I think that comes with some confusion around, like, getting like a 300 word count expectation or something like that. You never want to do the minimum, okay? You never want to do the minimum. So it's like, well, hey, I wrote 300 words. Why didn't I get an A? Because 300 is a minimum, and you need to develop as a student and as a thinker and as a professional to understand that if your approach to work is simply to check boxes, I've been asked to do A, B, and C, and that's it, that's not going to help you much professionally. Let me tell you why. A little bit of a tangent, but very important. When you graduate from this university or any other university, you will graduate with a degree that thousands, if not tens of thousands of people will also be earning at the exact same time. And if your whole intellectual development has been to just do the basic task you've been asked to do, you are going to flounder dramatically when you try to enter that workforce, because you are going to be competing with people who haven't done just the bare minimum for 4 years or more. So you're going to show up, hey, I did the bare minimum, where's my job? You will never get that job. You will be forever outplayed by people who have put in more time, more effort, and done more work. And that's just the reality of entering into a professional workforce. It's a reality of having a professional degree. You need to be as good as you can be. Now, so, if we do the minimum, we should expect something like a C range grade generally, right? You don't want that. If that's the best you can do, you want that. That's great. And I'll stand behind you 100%. If you can do better than that, you better do better than that, because it's going to be hard when you graduate, okay? So you want to be aware of that. It's an important thing to be aware of. And so when you're thinking about composing and you're realizing that the assignment asks you to engage with multiple ideas, you want to make sure you're writing with multiple paragraphs. So that's kind of part one of the point I wanted to make. The other point I wanted to make is that one of the things happening in step 13 is you're being asked to think about, a number of significant ideas in a reading that you've done from Kelly. And there were submissions that showed, again, extremely limited engagement with Kelly. So maybe one cited reference to the whole reading, when there are like multiple ideas that you could engage with as you're talking about the main points, the main ideas, your big takeaways from the reading. So again, if one point is the best you can do, that's great. But we want to push ourselves as much as we can, okay, to do as well as we can with these assignments. Again, with an average of 92, the class is doing really well. But I just want to, be clear, if you're struggling, if you're confused by A, B, or C, those are some thoughts to keep in mind as you continue to make your way through the course. All right, so those are some comments. We did very well. I think I just recounted 10 different assignments, all of which are 90 or above for a class average. That's really good, okay? And we also need to understand there's a number of assignments in this class. So again, if we struggle with one or two of these assignments, it is not the end of the world. There is plenty of runway to get things, turned around and ready to go on. So I wouldn't worry about that as long as you're making changes. If we're not making changes, there's not much that can be done. So for example, if you're not watching these videos, there's not much that can be done, but hopefully you're watching these videos. Anyway, I'll keep this short because this has been a long video, but I hope those comments are useful to you as you continue to make your way through the class.